This is a big week for this channel, something I've never done before, but this Sunday's video is over a year in the making. You see, last August, I was supposed to fly from Lagos to Mumbai with Air Peace in their 777 business class, but one thing led to another and that didn't happen. Finally, last month, I was able to fly to London in their business class, but if you've watched my videos, you know I like to include the anecdotes and history of the airline, and there's just too much to fit in one video. From them canceling flights, to the mismanagement of my ticket, through the painstaking journey of just getting a Nigerian visa, including lost passports and multiple trips to DC, all ending in what I'm sure you will agree is a very surprising flight. This, in a 3-part saga, is my Air Peace story. Now for starters, Air Peace made the experience as terrible as possible before I even stepped foot in the country. I was originally booked to fly in August of last year, but my flight was cancelled, so they moved it to November, which then gave me visa issues with Nigeria. I wrote to them to tell them the new date wouldn't work, and I was told that if I wanted to change it again, it would cost me a fare difference, even though they were the ones who moved my original date, meaning I hadn't used the one free change that I get with a cancelled flight. I tried to pick a date in December, but after exchanging emails, it took so long to figure things out that the travel date I was looking at came and went. Then the same thing happened for January. Finally, I picked a date far enough out in February that I would have time to be patient with them. This almost blew up in my face, however, because just when I thought they couldn't get worse, they did. First off, the average response time to my emails was almost a week. Sometimes I even had to send a follow-up email to make sure they received my previous email. Their emails were mostly unproductive, not actually changing the flight, just regurgitating the same info about having received my email, and that I'd be responsible for the fare difference, completely ignoring my messages about not getting my one free change due to my originally cancelled flight. Finally, however, after a month of emails, we settled on a travel date that had almost no fare difference. We were almost done getting it confirmed until they sent an email saying that in order to book a flight with Air Peace, I'd have to pay a no-show fee for a flight in November. You know, the flight I told them originally wouldn't work for me, the one I emailed them about even before the travel date. I fought it, but it was either pay $150 or not fly Air Peace, so I agreed. It took 2 weeks of emailing just to get information on how to pay, and then when I went to pay, the amount changed to $550. Their reasoning was that there was a fare difference for my flight date. I tried explaining that the only reason there was a fare difference is because it took them almost 2 months just to tell me how to pay them the no-show fee that realistically shouldn't have been charged anyway. They then stopped responding to my emails altogether, and I sent them one per day just to follow up since the travel date was now within a week, and I still didn't have a ticket. But since I didn't want to pay a dime without talking to anyone, I called their customer help phone number, which didn't work a few times. When I finally got through to someone, I explained the situation, and very quickly it ended up with them yelling at me and telling me not to fly with Air Peace or come to Nigeria, that they don't need me there. I was able to message an agent after all that time who was finally able to tell me that without a Nigerian bank account, I would not be able to pay that fee. She told me I could pay in person at an Air Peace office, which only exists in Nigeria, so I booked the rest of my trip without knowing what truly awaited me in Nigeria. Now, after saying all that, as mentioned, I know very well that I did this to myself, choosing to visit Nigeria and fly Air Peace, but at the same time, especially after the absolutely horrendous Nigerian visa process, if the country, and especially the airline, want to be acknowledged and appreciated on a global scale, there is some serious work to be done. So that's what I mean when I say it felt like Air Peace didn't even want me there. But I feel like I got the same treatment from the Nigerian embassy itself. I applied for my visa 2 months in advance of the trip. The first time you get a Nigerian visa, you have to get photographed and fingerprinted, so I had to day trip it out to Washington, D.C. where they do the fingerprinting. Not at the embassy, but an off-site location that works with the embassy. Essentially, they look at your paperwork and gather the necessary information and then send all of it over to the embassy. Originally, they told me the process would take 2 to 3 weeks and they'd ship my passport back to me using the prepaid FedEx envelope I included for them. In the meantime, I had the ability to get email notifications as my passport went through the process. I got the alert that my passport was sent to the embassy and then received by the embassy for processing in the same day that I did my fingerprinting. 5 days after I got fingerprinted, it was updated to say that my visa was assessed. Cool, I thought. This means I should get it back in the next week since my envelope was overnight shipping. Well, a month went by, and I still had no sign of my passport. I figured I'd contact them to see if I could get an update, but I called the passport services offices I got fingerprinted at first, and was sent to their voicemail. Then an automated message said the voicemail was full and couldn't accept new messages, then hung up the line. I then tried calling the Nigerian embassy in DC, but got the same result. Sent to voicemail, voicemail was full, got hung up on before ever being able to talk to a human. I even tried every department at the embassy. My next plan was to call all the Nigerian consulates in the US and try to get the message passed on, but I had the same issue with the consulates of New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and Atlanta, and all of their corresponding visa services offices, like the one I went to in DC for fingerprinting. After being hung up on by computers like 20 times, I gave up and tried emailing them and then let it be. I figured I'd get the passport eventually at least. Well, another month went by. I called all those numbers about once a week, right at their opening hours, and sent an email as well, but still no word back. Finally, I heard back from my email that I had sent over a month ago to the embassy. All the response said is, "We don't know, contact the visa service office." I was even able to have one of my followers who has a contact at the embassy look into it, and they couldn't find it. Now I was worried because I'd seen reviews of the Nigerian embassy just straight up losing people's passports. Made me nervous enough that I booked another day trip to DC to investigate the situation myself. I went to the visa service office, who said the visa was processed and should have been sent back to me roughly 2 months ago. So they recommended that I go to the embassy, which is where my passport should be. So I got in my rental car, made the 45-minute drive to the Nigerian embassy, because why make the visa office close when you could make it in the next state over? I walked into the embassy and was told that they couldn't help me unless I had a signed note from the visa services office. So I drove another 45 minutes back to the visa service office to get my signed letter so the visa office could even help me. While there, the employees were less than helpful, and the one helping me reeked of weed and spent more time talking to other employees and laughing than actually doing the work. They even called the embassy, but gave me their personal cell phone to talk to them myself. Not knowing what was going on since they didn't tell me, I just re-explained my situation to this random person from the embassy, who didn't really know what to do to help me. After the phone call, I talked with the visa services employee, who just said, "This is weird. It was finished 2 months ago. I have no idea why you haven't gotten it back, but it's not here." So they gave me paper to go back to the embassy and check there. With my signed letter and another 45-minute drive, I went back to the embassy. I was let in just to hear that they couldn't track it down at that moment. So, defeated, I flew back to San Francisco with no sign of a passport. I learned later they had run out of visas. But for 2 months? Also, I'll mention I had the same issue with Bolivia running out of visas, but unlike Nigeria, the people in the Bolivian consulate were able to submit a letter and also give me a printed copy to bring with me that says that I have met the requirements for a visa and to issue me a visa on arrival. In the meantime, however, I had to cancel 2 trips and about 10 videos that I hope to make up for. Eventually, I finally got the passport back with the multiple entry visa, but all said and done, it was about a 3-month process when it seems like it probably could have been about a week.
Now that being said, I don't want this to be misconstrued as all Nigerians, as a good chunk of Nigerians are some of the nicest people that I've met in my travels and I keep in touch with to this day. I just feel like they're being misrepresented by a lot of people on the front lines. So back to the travel day, however, what came out of all this?
Upon arrival to the Lagos airport from Uganda, I had roughly 19 hours until my Air Peace flight the next day. I cleared immigration and went to the Air Peace ticket counter in the departures level to pay the required amount and get my ticket issued. Once I got to the front of the line, it was like all my previous messages didn't matter. Despite having many messages from my contact at Air Peace that I'd been talking to, who told me that she'd left notes on the reservation and that the ticket would be confirmed, it just had to be paid, I was told the same news that I had heard months back, that it would cost me a no-show fee and a fee to change. The only issue? The call center closed at 4 p.m., and I was there at 6 p.m. For whatever reason, the ticket office could not process the change before talking to them. The information I was given was that they had to make the request for the change, then send an email to the main office to get the current price I need to pay, then they would collect the money and send the proof of payment back to the main office, who would then confirm the ticket. I was told the office opened at 8 a.m. and to come back then. For the time being, I went to my hotel to sleep for the night before returning at 7:30 a.m. the next morning to be sure I was at the front of the line to get help, as, at the moment, I had no clue if I was even going to be flying on Air Peace. I figured 4.5 hours before departure would be enough. Finally, at 8:30, we were given the price. I gave them my card, but it was declined. I tried with a couple other cards, but with the same outcome. Assuming my bank flagged it as fraud, I called them and they told me that the issue was with the merchant, because from their end, they couldn't even see an attempted charge. Plan B was for me to get cash, but the only ATM is in the other, old terminal. which required another few security checks. Luckily, one of the Airpeace representatives offered to come with me. After a good walk, we got to the ATM, but I needed more than was allowed by the ATM, so I had to use a couple different cards to get the money. When I had about 80% of it, the ATM's all disconnected from the network and I was unable to take out any more money. The Airpeace agent was able to give me the rest from her own money, which was incredibly gracious, and I made sure to pay her back with tip after the whole thing was over. It took over an hour since the ATM could only give small portions at a time and it was incredibly slow. All in all, it took 36 repetitions of getting cash out before I got all the cash I could get, and a little under 2 hours, and ended up with this ungodly pile of cash, making me feel rich until I realized it was just under $300 US. By this time, we were an hour and 45 minutes before departure, and according to the woman helping me, I had to be checked in the next 15 minutes or the window would close for my flight. As we walked back, she called ahead to the desk to get the ticket processed and have it marked as paid and that we'd be there with the money shortly. After more security checkpoints, we were back at the ticket counter, this time with enough cash to cover it. When we got back, however, the agent working at the desk said there was no record of trying to adjust the ticket because it expired in November. Long story short, all the work we had done in the last few months was lost. We had to start the whole process over again, and the new lady at the desk was seemingly doing a million things at once, despite my flight departing in an hour and a half. They had to figure out what was going on from square one. After a few phone calls with them, a man came up from the counter yelling at me and asking what I was doing since they were closing the counter, and the ladies at the desk told me to just go check in while they sorted it out. I thought this meant we were set, but at the counter they couldn't find a reservation, so I was told that there was now nothing that could be done, as the flight had already begun boarding and we hadn't even gotten it confirmed by the main office. So, after 3 months of messages and 4 hours at the airport talking to agents, not including the night before, Airpeace had just pulled the rug out from under me, and I was left with no options, and not enough money for another ticket since all I had was the cash I had to pull out. I was given back that cash, although they took a cut for themselves, and I wasn't told how much. Defeated, I luckily was able to get a flight with Ethiopian Airlines using my United miles, which just may be the new strategy I developed, saving miles for emergencies like this one.
Now this appears to be far from an isolated accident. We all know Josh Cahill's fabulous and far from glowing coverage of Airpeace throughout the years.
There's also a million articles out there covering their fraudulent practices, unscrupulous safety history, and piss-poor customer service. In an article written by a Nigerian legal practitioner, he laid out a frustrating experience that seems to parallel the issues everyone else is having, but from a Nigerian citizen and not just a foreigner, which I include since Airpeace's CEO seems to think it's all the non-Nigerians who have a vendetta against the airline. This article from The Whistler explains that his flight was delayed without notice. At check-in, his boarding pass had a different time than was scheduled. He asked the agent to clarify and was given an even later time. With confusion, he inquired amongst other passengers on his flight and found that many people had been given different information that didn't match, so people were anxiously checking in with gate agents to sort it out. Passengers seeking assistance or representation were faced with apathetic employees resistant to offer any real help besides giving a WhatsApp number for Airpeace offices that were closed at the time. Many passengers had connecting flights and could have found other options or rebooked, but the lack of communication wasted hours and left them stranded and out of options. Incremental delays rather than one major delay saves face with the customer and stops them from needing assistance and potential refund, as no one gaslights like a Nigerian. Information is so readily available in this age of travel that lapses like this really highlight an airline's inefficiency and lack of effort and care. They've contested that governments favor their own carriers on Nigerian routes, but if you had the choice of United or Air France, which have far succeeded international standards, have great technology, and the best passenger communication, why on earth would you want to fly with Airpeace?
In the end, I learned a couple things.
First off, about half of Nigerians that I met in my travel there at least are the nicest, most kind people that exist in the world. Like my friends, Israel and Emmanuel, who I met on my travels and still talk to fairly frequently. The other half of Nigerians are the most passive-aggressive people. Even if they're helping you, their tone and body language just feels as if they're annoyed with you. There's a lot of yelling, common questions get returned with harsh responses or even insults. Worst of all, no one accepted any responsibility. I tried to apologize to the Airpeace staff at the end of this since they were just trying to help me, and the response I got was, "That's good. Why would you do this? Why would you not do this earlier?" Even though they knew the answer. I apologized again and was off. Throughout the whole experience with Air Peace and getting my Nigerian visa, there was what felt like 1,000 hiccups, and never once did I get an apology or an explanation. One person blamed it on the next person who blamed it on the next person. Very unprofessional, very unmotivated, and very upsetting for someone who has dealt with hundreds of airlines and loads of countries at this point. Working with these people felt like working with a brick wall that threw punches. I either got no response or a response that just left a poor taste in my mouth. That's about all I'll say for now, but I will include that it seems worse in the Lagos region of the country. When I've been in Abuja, I've found that people are far more warm and welcoming on average, but maybe that's just me. In Abuja, I was greeted with smiles from just about everyone, far less pandering for money, and multiple great conversations and compliments. The reason I post this special video, however, is just because the weekend brings the special upload. You see, my Nigerian visa was a 5-year multiple entry visa. I spent a lot of time debating if it was worth trying Air Peace, and after a while I figured that after all this, I'd regret not crossing the finish line. So I paid extra money to book with Air Peace directly, not to mention the over $2,000 I had spent to this point that was 100% wasted, and I had to buy a new ticket from scratch. I confirmed the date and planned to arrive 36 hours before departure just in case, and well, it worked. I finally flew with Air Peace on this flight, and this weekend will be the video explaining how that went. So hopefully y'all can see that this is about sharing my experience, considering that I've never had anything like this happen in my travels. I'm not saying that this is going to be everyone's experience. But stay tuned for parts 2 and 3 of this saga, and until then, safe travels. I'll see y'all next time.